The desert is a very unforgiving place. There is really hot sun in the daytime. There is cold freezing in the night. And the wind is biting with sand. On the south end of the Sinai Peninsula is Mount St. Catherine. It is said to be the place where Moses encountered the burning bush. All things religious can be debatable, and most of us who go on religious tours say, well, it's close to here or close enough. Near the mountain is St. Catherine's Monastery. It was built by the Byzantines about 400, so it's Eastern Orthodox. There are monks there that worship twice a day, and it's a very sedate service where they go in and take ages lighting candles, and then sit in prayer, and then leave. It's a very rugged building complex with angular walls. Along one wall is a burning bush. It is said to be the bush in which God appeared to Moses. It was transplanted a couple of hundred years ago during a building project, but they say it's still the same bush with the same roots. So this is not the burning bush that we have in our gardens. A dozen years ago, I planted the red burning bush in the backyard thinking this was something religious. Well, it's not the same at all. So the burning bush in the Sinai has yellow leaves, bright yellow leaves. It's a bramble, and it is very durable and grows like a weed. It has to be cut back every couple of years or it gets too big. So along that wall is this burning bush, the bramble. It grows fast, it's yellow, said to be the one. And somebody humorously, the group I guess, has humorously placed a fire extinguisher on the wall right nearby. People have found this place to be very meaningful, very holy, a very special place. And yet here it is in the desert, very primitive, very rugged, everything very mundane. Well, mundane. That's the way in which we could describe this experience, the call to Moses. He was in the middle of his daily life. He was tending the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro. He was making sure they had enough food and enough water and were protected from all the marauders and difficulties that there are in the wilderness. It was in his daily life. He just got up one morning, was doing this work with the sheep, and there was God in the burning bush. And it changed his life forever. Well, we have other experiences like that. Remember in Luke 2, it was the shepherds tending their flocks out in the fields, and from the heavens came the angels announcing Jesus' birth. Ordinary day, ordinary times, a very mundane situation in which God spoke to the people. So often we think that calls have to be something dramatic, that we have to be off at some kind of retreat or revival or in some special place that we have traveled to on a pilgrimage. We think that's where we're going to encounter God and where we're going to experience the call. It's not quite the case, however, because in the Bible, we have the story of Moses being called, doing his work as a shepherd. In Judges, Gideon was out threshing when he received a message from God. Elisha, in 1 Kings, was out plowing a field, and God spoke to him. It's in people's mundane, ordinary lives that God speaks to them. I suppose many of us can recount a more dramatic time when maybe God spoke to us, and sometimes it was not that lasting either. I guess my first call was when I was in confirmation class in grade 8. We went to the movie A Man Called Peter. It was about Peter Marshall, who was a Scotsman who had gone to the United States and became the chaplain of the U.S. Senate. I went home that night and prayed that I'd be a minister just like Peter Marshall. Well, I think over time as a youth, you kind of leave those kinds of things behind. They were maybe seminal, but maybe not. Because it's later as I simply saw and experienced the needs in the church and saw certain situations that I was called time and again, simply responding to the needs that were before. And so I think all of us are called in our daily mundane lives. We experience some needs within ourselves, some changes we hope for, and we can experience that as a call from God. We may have these needs that we experience within our families, within the church, within the community, and we need to say yes here in the middle of what's happening in our lives. God is speaking to us. God is calling to us. Sometimes it's in the middle of an illness that we have, or sometimes in a time of conflict, and we can say, yes, God has spoken to us in that time. So God speaks to each of us in the very ordinary daily lives that we have, just as he did with Moses. And God calls us by name. In Isaiah 43 is that saying that has become a great hymn for us. I have called you by your name. You are mine. If we ask what God's first words were to Moses, many of us might respond, take off your sandals, you are standing on holy ground. But remember that scripture lesson, the first words were, Moses, Moses. He was called by name. God calls each of us by name. God knows each of us. God relates with each of us. When I went to my first settlement charge, I was very young and very green, and the family was having great difficulties. I met with a father whose son had many challenges in life and had attempted suicide. And we sat together and he pleaded, Ken, what am I going to do? Well, I'm sure whatever I said was completely inadequate, and I'm not sure I'd say anything that was terribly adequate in these days either. But I was talking with a supervisor in training about it. He said, you were called by name. You were pulled out to do this. You were asked for a response. I think each of us gets called by name because God knows and meets with each of us, calling us by name, having created us in a miracle of birth, having made us unique. A short strand of your DNA is so unique, it isn't replicated in 56 billion other people. You are special and unique, and you are called by God. Called by name. God speaks to you just as God spoke to Moses. You can rediscover God's holiness. We sometimes lose it along the way in our mundane daily lives. We lose that sense, that connection. God said to Moses, "Take off your sandals, you are standing on holy ground." That has very special meaning for Hebrew people, because for thousands of years they have tried to have their own ground. They still don't really have their own ground. There's a lot of conflict about it. And they really yearn to have that ground for themselves. But I've come to believe that all land is holy ground. Very special, made and given to us by God. I sometimes, well, almost every time, tell people that this summer I was in Israel and Jordan. I try to avoid saying I was in the Holy Land, because we believe that all land is holy and unique. And so we look for those kinds of experiences where we can meet with God in a special way. I know sometimes it's in worship when we hear a particular lesson or when we have a particular hymn. It can be in study when we learn something new and is an insight for us, something that is different. But for many of us, it is in nature, maybe walking and seeing a mountain or seeing the sea. But for many of us, it's simply weeding the garden, knowing we're in this very special place, and knowing that God gives this to us and that God speaks to us in this time if we keep ourselves open to it. So be open to God's presence. Be willing to hear when God calls your name. And you can receive God's assurance as well, just as Moses did. Remember Moses protesting. He said, "I'm so old. I'm not even a good speaker. Get my brother Aaron to come. He can lead the people out of Egypt. He can do all of this job. Why are you looking to me?" And God reassured Moses that he was the one. And he truly was, because he had those organization skills that helped to sustain the people in that 40 years in the wilderness and to build community and to understand who they were. It didn't just need a good speaker, it needed someone who had some organization skills, and Moses was able to do that. We have all our protests, don't we? We think it can't be us. We're too old, just like Moses. It's someone else's turn. I've done that before. There are others around that are much more able than I am to do this job. But God calls us and will give us a strength and the reassurance to simply carry on. Let us join in prayer. Oh God, we thank you for the story of Moses. We know that you came to him in his daily life, and that you will come to us in our mundane daily lives and speak to us. We know that you will call us by name, that we are unique and very special. Help us, O God, in days ahead to rediscover holiness, to recognize that you are here with us in these times, no matter what we are doing. And, oh God, reassure us. Give us the assurance that we can respond to your call to us, that we can truly be your people. Oh God, thank you for the story of Moses and for the way that it is a demonstration of our own lives and our own relationship to you. Amen.